The man, my ex-boss, had been cornering me against walls for 3 months, was currently across the ballroom, moving through the crowd with the specific, patient navigation of someone who had already decided where I was. I had 45 seconds, maybe. I am not a person who panics. I have a system for most things, a step-by-step, procedural calm that my college roommate called robotic and my mother called a gift. I had used it to get myself through my father leaving, through 3 years of underpaid gallery work, through the night 3 months ago when I had seen something in the private storage room that I was still trying to figure out how to unknow. The system failed me at the 40-second mark. The man standing to my left was tall, dark-suited, alone in the way that very powerful people are alone in crowds, not isolated but separate, surrounded by a radius of careful distance that other people maintained around him without appearing to. He was looking at something across the room. Strong jaw, dark hair silvering at the temples in a way that looked deliberate rather than inevitable. He held a glass of scotch he hadn't touched. I grabbed his arm, not dramatically. I am not a dramatic person. I just reached over and put my hand on the sleeve of his jacket and said, very quietly, "I'm sorry. I need someone to pretend to be my husband for 10 minutes. Please." The radius of careful distance around him did something interesting. It expanded. The 2 men nearest us moved back without looking like they'd moved. The woman to his right found something urgent to attend to. 6 feet away. He looked down at my hand on his sleeve. He had a watch on that wrist. Old, steel case, worn, leather strap, and my fingers were over it without meaning to be, and I felt the warmth of his skin through the sleeve and the hard edge of the watch beneath, and I thought, in the absolutely wrong order of priorities, that's a beautiful watch. Then he looked at my face. I don't know what I looked like. Frightened, probably. Trying not to look frightened, which is worse. He looked at me with dark eyes that were doing something I didn't understand. Not surprise, exactly. More like a very fast and very thorough inventory. 10 minutes, he said. Please. Stay close. He set his scotch down on a passing waiter's tray without looking at the waiter. Don't let go. He turned toward me and put his hand at the small of my back, and the touch was light and deliberate and completely convincing, and I understood instantly why people believed in actors. I didn't look at him. I looked straight ahead, at the crowd, at my ex-boss. Director Callum Reed, 48, who had been using the professional hierarchy of the Halverson Gallery as a personal hunting ground for longer than I had worked there. And I watched him see me. I watched him see the man beside me. Something happened in Callum's face that I had never produced in it. He stopped walking. "Smile," the stranger said, quietly, near my ear. I smiled. It felt like a different face than the one I usually wore. Callum turned, not gradually, pivoted, redirected, found something else to be interested in with a speed that would have been funny if I weren't so relieved I felt hollow. "Your ex-boss?" the stranger said. "Current. Unfortunately." A pause. "Not for long." I looked up at him. It was a strange thing to say, and the way he said it. Flat, almost bored. The way you state a fact you've already decided. Sat oddly in my chest. "I just needed 10 minutes, I said. "I know." We stood together at the edge of the room, and I was acutely aware of his hand at my back, the weight of it, the temperature. And I was also aware that the 2 men who had moved away were still in my peripheral vision, maintaining exactly the same distance, and they were facing outward in the way that was not accidental. "What's your name?" I asked. "Luca." "Elena." I waited. He didn't offer a last name. "Are you here for work?" "Yes." "What do you do?" The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. I manage things. Across the room, I watched 2 men I had not seen arrive approach Callum Reed from different angles. They said something. Callum's expression went through several stages very quickly. He set down his champagne and walked toward the exit between them with a gait that looked voluntary and wasn't. My 10 minutes weren't up. "What is—" I started. "He won't bother you again." Luca removed his hand from my back. Slowly, he stepped back, just slightly, and the professional distance returned between us, and I felt its arrival the way you feel a draft when a door opens. "You should go home, Elena." What did you— Go home. He picked up a new glass of scotch from a passing tray, unhurried, untroubled, a man who had completed a small errand. Tonight. I looked at him. He was already looking elsewhere, at the room, the exits, something I couldn't identify. His jaw was a clean line in the ballroom light, and the old watch on his wrist caught the light for a moment, worn leather and cold steel. He had agreed to my 10 minutes in under 5 seconds. He had fixed something I had been afraid of for 3 months in under 10. He had not asked me for anything. I should have gone home. I stood there instead, holding my champagne glass, trying to remember how to leave a room normally. By the time I reached the coat check, I knew 2 things. The first, Callum Reed was not going to be a problem anymore. The second, slower and more unsettling, settling into my ribs like a change in weather. I had no idea who I had just grabbed, but the city felt different on the drive home. Smaller, like something had shifted its geometry without telling me. I went back to work on Monday and Callum Reed's office was empty. Not temporarily empty, cleared out empty. The nameplate was gone. His assistant, a nervous young man named Tobias who had spent 18 months apologizing on Callum's behalf, was at his desk looking profoundly uncertain about his own continued employment. He resigned, Tobias told me, in the voice of someone who does not believe the word resigned accurately describes what happened. Effective Friday. I stood in the corridor and thought about Luca, about not for long. I thought about that for longer than was reasonable, and then I went to open the Halversons East Gallery for a visiting collection from Milan, because I had a job, and the job required me to be in it. The Halverson Gallery occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse in the West Loop, industrial bones dressed in white walls and precise lighting, the kind of space that made objects feel inevitable. I had worked here for 3 years. I knew where every Tamra was, which junction box fed the north wing's humidity control, and the precise weight of the Halversons' original Basquiat, which was kept in the private storage room on the lower level behind a keypad door I was one of 4 people authorized to access. 3 months ago, I had gone into that room late on a Thursday evening for an inventory check. 2 men were inside who were not on any authorized list. They hadn't seen me. The room had a secondary access, a maintenance corridor I knew, and they clearly didn't. I had backed out slowly, gone home, and spent the following weeks trying to decide what exactly I had seen and what, precisely, to do about it. The crates they'd been examining weren't art. I had not reported it. This is the part I am not proud of. I had not reported it because I had seen their faces and something in my body. Some deep, unargued animal intelligence had said no before my rational mind could construct a reason. I was still sitting on that decision when my phone buzzed at 11 on Monday morning. Unknown number. Chicago area code. There's a car outside your building. It's not a threat. L. I read it twice. Then I went to the window. Black car, street level. A man leaning against it with his arms crossed, who was built like an architectural feature. Broad, solid, the kind of person who made the space around them feel load-bearing. He was also holding a paper bag from what appeared to be a deli and eating a sandwich with the expression of a man engaged in a private and meaningful experience. I went downstairs because I couldn't figure out what else to do. Nico, the man said, extending the hand that wasn't holding the sandwich. He had a square face and honest eyes and the distinct air of someone who had been told to make a good impression and was sincerely trying. I drive for Mr. Moretti. He wanted me to check you were okay after Friday, Moretti. I filed that away. I'm fine. Good, great. He looked at his sandwich. You want half? It's from Daria's place, the sandwich shop on Monroe. She does this thing with the bread. It's, you know what? It doesn't matter. He seemed to deflate slightly. She doesn't know I exist. I looked at him. The woman at the sandwich shop? She's reading Dostoevsky. He said it like a medical diagnosis. Every time I go in, different book, but always Dostoevsky. I tried to bring it up once. I said, good book? She said, just, He took a bite of the sandwich with deep personal feeling. What does a man do with I was charmed against my better judgment. Come back tomorrow and ask about the book. He looked at me with the expression of someone encountering a radical idea for the first time. Yeah, I could do that. He straightened up. Anyway, Mr. Moretti wants to know if you'd be willing to meet. He has some information that may be relevant to your situation. My situation. The thing at the gallery. He said it carefully, like a man handling something he'd been told was fragile. 3 months ago. The cold arrived in my chest without warning. He knew. Luca Moretti knew about the storage room. What kind of information? I said. I'm just the driver. He said it with genuine apology, but he wouldn't send me if it wasn't important. He's careful about that. I sat in the back of the black car and Nico drove in silence for 6 blocks before saying, unprompted, for what it's worth, he doesn't usually send me for people. He sends other people, scarier people. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Him sending me is the friendly version. I'm not sure that's reassuring. No, he agreed. Probably not. I wanted context. He looked at the road. Do you think I should bring flowers? To Daria's? Or is that too much for a sandwich shop? I opened my mouth. Don't answer that, he said. I'm spiraling. This happens. The building we arrived at was a converted printing house in River North, beautiful in the specific way of old industrial things given new purpose, brick and steel and tall windows. A man I hadn't noticed during the drive was already opening my door before the car stopped. I stepped out. I thought about going home. The thought had a door in it, and the door was open, and I could see the other side. I went inside instead. Upstairs, a room with a long table and gray light from the windows and the smell of coffee, and Luca Moretti standing at the far end of it. He looked exactly like he had at the gala except without the tuxedo, and somehow he was more imposing in a dark sweater, and he looked at me when I came in with those flat, thorough eyes and said, You didn't go home Friday night. You knew that. Yes. He pulled out the chair at the nearest end of the table. Not the head. The side, deliberately placed. Sit here. This is not an interrogation. You saw something in the storage room, he said, that you haven't told anyone. How? Sit down, Piccola. The word landed lightly. Italian, casual, almost thoughtless. The way you'd address someone younger, someone smaller, someone who needed to be managed gently. Something about it pricked the edge of my pride. But I sat down. Because the door I'd been ignoring for 3 months had just opened from the other side. Luca Moretti told me things in a specific order. Not the whole truth at once. I understood that later. He told me things in the sequence that would keep me in my chair, each piece of information arriving just as the previous one was still being processed, so that I was always slightly behind, always adjusting, never able to stand up and leave on a sentence I had fully understood. He was very good at this. The first thing he told me was that the men in the storage room worked for a man named Renato Argento, and that Renato Argento had been moving untaxed assets through high-end gallery logistics for 18 months, and that the Halverson was one of 4 Chicago locations he had been using. The second thing was that my gallery director, not Callum, his predecessor, a man named William Chen, who had retired quietly 14 months ago, had been the inside contact. Callum had inherited the arrangement without fully understanding what it was. The third thing was that I had been in that storage room at exactly the wrong moment, and someone had been watching the room's secondary access on a private feed, and the footage existed. My hands were flat on the table when he said that. I noticed them being flat, and noticed that I was pressing them down to keep them still. Renato has the footage, Luca said. He was sitting across from me now, forearms on the table, the old watch on his wrist, picking up the light from the tall windows. He had not moved toward me. He had not probed toward me. He had not tried to manage my reaction. He was just stating things, plainly, with the quality of someone who understood that the information itself was load-bearing and did not need decoration. He has not used it yet. Why not? Because he wants something from me. He looked at me steadily. You are leverage. You've been leverage for 3 months and you didn't know it. The silence that followed was the specific kind that happens when something you suspected becomes something you know. What does he want from you? I said. My position. Flat. final. He was my family's underboss for 6 years. He believes the organization should be his. His family. I sat with the weight of those 2 words. The Moretti name had arrived when Nico said it in the street, and I had filed it without unpacking it. But sitting across from Luca in this room with its brick walls and its particular quiet, the quiet of a building full of people who weren't making noise because they didn't need to. The word family carried its full Chicago meaning. I had asked a stranger to pretend to be my husband. The stranger ran the Moretti crime family. You should have led with that, I said. The corner of his mouth. Would you have stayed? Probably not. What do you want from me? Right now, nothing? He sat back. Renato will move eventually. When he does, I need to know what you saw, exactly, in detail. You are the only witness to his operation who was not already in my employ or his. And in exchange, the footage disappears, and you're protected while Renato is a problem. I thought about the storage room. The 2 men. The crates. The thing I had seen that my body had said no about before my brain could form the argument. What was in the crates? He looked at me for a moment. Something in his expression adjusted. Infinitesimally, a recalculation. You don't need that information yet. He kept using that word, like I was on a schedule he had already drawn up. Katerina came in then. A woman I had not seen arrive, 60 or near it, in a gray suit that was expensive in the way of clothes that don't announce themselves, with the posture of someone who had been the sharpest person in every room they'd ever entered, and had stopped needing to prove it. She placed a folder in front of Luca without breaking stride and looked at me with the direct, appraising attention of a doctor reviewing an X-ray. Miss Vasquez, she said. Not warmly, not hostilely, assessing. This is Katerina, Luca said. She'll coordinate your security. I didn't agree to security. No, he said, but you're going to. Katerina sat down at the table's corner, the position that allowed her to see both of us, and folded her hands. I want to tell you something, she said to me directly without preamble. Not as part of this arrangement. As a woman who has watched this world from inside it for 30 years. I waited. The women who come into this life voluntarily are not the ones who suffer most, she said. It's the ones who come in sideways, through a side door believing they'll be back out in a week. She held my eyes. Understand what you're agreeing to before you agree to it. That's all. Luca looked at the table. He didn't contradict her. Sal came in through the side door, limping slightly, the 2 missing fingers on his left hand briefly visible as he set down a tray of coffee with the careful precision of a man who has adjusted his grip for so long the adjustment is invisible. He looked at me when he set the cup in front of me, and something in his face was kind. Not performatively kind. Genuinely, specifically kind. The kind that had a history behind it. Milk or sugar, he said. Just black, I said. Thank you. He nodded. He seemed to approve of something, though I didn't know what. I wrapped my hands around the cup and felt the warmth of it and the weight of what had just been laid in front of me. The gallery. The storage room. 3 months of carrying something I didn't understand alone. Luca was watching me from across the table. Not speaking. Waiting. He was going to wait as long as it took, I realized. He was a man who did not rush things because he did not need to. Time worked differently for him. He simply occupied it until it moved his way. I looked up. Tell me about Renato Argento, I said. Luca reached for the folder. 3 days into what Luca's people called my temporary relocation. I called it living in a very secure and very beautiful apartment on the 23rd floor of a building I had not chosen, with 2 men I had not hired positioned in the corridor outside. I got the call I had been waiting for from my mother, Elena. Her voice had the specific texture it got when she knew something was wrong and was constructing a way to say it. Your father called. My father, Francesco Vasquez. Born Francesco Ferraro, changed his name at 22 for reasons he had never explained. My mother had married him at 23 for reasons she had never explained either, and he had been in my life in the partial, unreliable way of someone who meant well and was chronically somewhere else. What did he want? He's in Chicago. A pause. He said he heard you were involved with the Moretti family and wanted me to tell you to leave the city. I sat down on the edge of the bed in the borrowed apartment and looked at the wall. My father knew the Moretti name. My father had heard from somewhere that I was involved. And my father, who had left when I was 7 and sent birthday cards that arrived reliably 2 weeks late, was scared enough to call my mother. "Mom," I said, "how does he know that name?" Silence on the line that lasted 1 beat too long. "I don't know, baby." She did know. The shape of that silence had a specific architecture. I went to find Luca. He was in the main office of the building's private floor, a room I had seen once, briefly, when Nico had walked me past it. I knocked. A voice said something in Italian that I chose to interpret as, "Come in." Luca was at the desk, and he was not alone. 2 men stood near the far wall, and the quality of the room when I entered, the specific recalibration that happened when something unexpected arrived, was the same quality I'd felt at the gala, the room adjusting around him. The 2 men looked at me. Then, at him. He said 1 word in Italian. They left. "My father," I said from the doorway. "Francesco Vasquez, born Ferraro." "He knows your name." Nothing moved in Luca's face, which was, I was learning, a kind of movement in itself, the specific stillness of information arriving and being processed behind a surface he controlled completely. "Come in," he said. "Close the door." I came in. I closed the door. He stood up from the desk and moved around it, not toward me but to the window. His orienting position, I was noticing. When he needed to think, he went to a window. "Francesco Ferraro," he said to the glass. "You know him." "I knew of him." He turned. "His father, your grandfather, worked for this family 30 years ago. Low level. He left before you were born." He looked at me with those flat, thorough eyes. I didn't connect the name. Because I use Vasquez. Yes, the weight of that sat between us. I was not random. I was not simply the girl who had grabbed his arm at a gala by coincidence. There was a thread between us that predated Friday night, that I hadn't known existed, that he was only now connecting. Dramatic irony. The listener already feels it. She is standing in the room of the man her grandfather served, not knowing that Renato Argento knows exactly who she is and why she matters beyond the footage. "Does Renato know?" I said. A pause. "Yes, I think he's known longer than I have." I crossed my arms. Not defensively. I just didn't know what to do with my hands. "So I'm not just a witness. You're a message," Luca said. "Using you is meant to be personal." He moved away from the window, toward me, then past me, toward the door, and I stepped aside, and in the narrow space between the desk's corner and the wall, we were closer than we had been since the gala, and I didn't move away and he didn't move past. And there was a half-second that was simply the fact of our proximity and the specific awareness that his arm was almost touching mine. He looked down. I looked up. The watch on his wrist was at eye level for me. Worn leather strap, the face slightly scratched, clearly old. Without thinking, I reached out and touched the edge of it, just the casing, my fingertip on the steel. "How old is this?" I said, completely irrelevant question. I needed something neutral to say. He looked at his wrist. At my finger on it. "It was my brother's," he said, very quiet. And then, before I could respond, before the sentence could land and change something, he stepped past me into the corridor. His brother's. Nico was in the hallway, holding a protein shake with the expression of a man drinking his own medicine. He looked between us with radar-accurate perception and said absolutely nothing, which seemed to cost him. Later, I asked him. "His brother Matteo," Nico said in the elevator, in the voice of someone sharing something he wasn't sure he should. "He died 8 years ago." He looked at the floor numbers changing. "It's not my story to tell, but the watch, Matteo gave it to him the week before." He shook his head. "You touched it and he answered you. That's not nothing." I looked at my own hand. Luca, in the corridor above us, was not thinking about the watch. HHHPOV, brief, sealed. She had touched it without knowing what it was. No one touched that watch. In 8 years, not one person had reached for it. She had done it because she needed something to say and she had no armor left. And somehow that specific, unguarded reaching had cost him more than the question. She was going to be a problem. He had known it since the gala. He was only now admitting the specific shape of it. The thing I had been sitting on for 3 months came out on a Wednesday, in the worst possible way. I had been spending my afternoons in the building's secondary office, a smaller room they had cleared for me, with a drafting table I had requested because I couldn't think without something to do with my hands. My work at the gallery had been temporarily suspended. Officially, I was on personal leave. Unofficially, I was in the middle of something I couldn't explain to HR, but I had taken my laptop and my project files and I was maintaining the appearance, at least to myself, of professional continuity. My skill, the specific one that had gotten me the Halverson job in the first place, was not hanging art or writing catalog copy. It was provenance research, specifically the authentication chain for works of contested or complicated origin. I could read an artwork's documentary history the way a doctor reads a scan, not just what was there but what was conspicuously missing, what had been added later, where the gaps in the chain had been smoothed over with paperwork that looked right and wasn't. I had been sitting on the knowledge that the crates in the storage room contained documentation, not art, not contraband in the traditional sense, but provenance papers, forged provenance chains for works that were moving through the legitimate art market carrying false histories. I had not told Muka this because I was not entirely sure I should hand that information to a man who ran a crime family, regardless of which side of it he was on. I was still deciding when Renato Argento decided for me. The message came through the gallery's internal system, which I should not have been able to access from a remote location, but which I had mapped thoroughly in 3 years of working there and could navigate through the back-end maintenance portal with the right credentials. I checked it once a day out of habit. The message was flagged administrative. The subject line was a file number I recognized. It was my provenance research file, the one I had filed 14 months ago on a Modigliani that had come through a private sale. I had flagged irregularities in the ownership chain. William Chen had told me the matter was resolved internally, and filed the report closed. The message attached to it now was from Renato's legal entity, a shell holding company I recognized from the names Luca had given me. And it contained my full name, my professional certification number, and a single line: "We know what she knows. She has 48 hours. I printed it. I walked downstairs. I found Luca in the main room with Katerina and Sal, and a fourth man I hadn't met, and I put the paper on the table in front of him. He read it, once. He looked up. 'Sit down,' he said. 'I need to tell you something first.' I stayed standing. The crates. In the storage room. They contained provenance documentation, forged authentication chains for high-value works. I know what they were because I recognize the format I do provenance authentication. It's what I specialize in." I held his eyes. "I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure you weren't sure you should hand that to me," he said. "Yes." The fourth man made a sound. Luca stopped it with a look. "What did you recognize specifically?" he said. "The chain format and the stamp source. There's a forger operating out of, I think, Antwerp. I've seen the work before in 2 other disputed pieces. If I can access the full file on the Modigliani case I flagged, I can likely trace the origination point." I sat down then because my legs had decided to. "I can read that documentation. That's what he's worried about. Not just that I saw the crates, that I can interpret them." Silence. Katerina looked at Luca. Something passed between them. A conversation conducted entirely in the language of 2 people who had worked together long enough to abbreviate everything. "You should have told me this at the beginning," Luca said. "I know. It would have changed." He stopped. "Controlled something. It changes the timeline. I know that too." Sal from across the table, "She's telling you now," said simply, without judgment. To Luca, not to me, but he glanced at me briefly when he said it. Something in his look was, not approval, exactly, recognition, like I had confirmed something he had been waiting to see confirmed. Luca looked at me for a long time, that inventory gaze, nothing hidden in it except everything. Can you trace it? He said. Given access to the full file and one additional database, yes, I think so. He nodded. One motion, then we do that. He pushed back from the table. And Elena? I looked up. The next time you're sitting on something relevant, he said, don't wait for Renato to force the issue. I wasn't sure I could trust you. You could, said simply, not defensively, as a statement of fact that he believed and did not feel the need to argue. You still can. I wanted to say something, the words I had, about how trust was not simple, about how a woman in my position could not simply decide to believe a man because he said so. Those words were accurate and also felt, in that moment, like the wrong tool for the thing I was actually feeling, which was, I believed him, and I didn't know what to do with that. Okay, I said. Not enough. The only word I had. He turned toward the door. Paused. Nico will take you to retrieve the file. He's a fraction of something in his voice. He's been wanting a reason to go past Monroe Street. From downstairs, with apparently superhuman hearing, Nico's voice, I heard that. I looked at Luca. He walked out. I sat at the table with Katerina and Sal and my own particular mixture of trust and terror. Betrayal was not confirmed, but it was close enough that I could smell it. The ambush happened outside the records building downtown. We had gone for the file. Nico and I, plus a man named Carver who drove and communicated primarily in nods. It should have taken 40 minutes. The building was clean. I had accessed the physical archive storage directly, pulled the Modigliani file, confirmed what I suspected within 10 minutes of looking at the chain documentation, the Antwerp forger's work, 3 other linked works. A distribution pattern that, once you knew how to read it, was startlingly clear. We were walking back to the car when the second vehicle came around the corner. It was fast. Too fast for that street. Nico had his hand on my arm before I had processed the sound of it, pulling me back against the building's recessed entrance, and Carver was moving in the other direction, and there were men getting out of the vehicle who were not there by coincidence. 3 of them. Focused, specific, efficient. Not looking at Nico. Looking at me. I understood then, in the space of about 4 seconds, what Luca had meant by message. I was the message. Getting to me was the point. Nico said one word into his phone. What happened next was very fast, and I am going to describe it plainly because anything else would be dishonest. Luca arrived in 90 seconds. I know this because I was counting, pressed against the brick wall of the records building with Nico in front of me like a wall himself, and there was shouting in Italian and the particular sharp sound of physical violence that is nothing like the movies, faster, uglier, more final. Then it stopped. And Luca was there. He came directly to me. His jacket was open, his knuckles were split on the right hand, and his face was different. Not angry. I had expected anger. What I saw instead was something colder and more complete than anger, something that had been at the center of him the whole time and was now simply visible. He put both hands on my face, checked me in the methodical way he did. Eyes, jaw, throat. And the touch of his hands was the same as the gala, the same as every time he had checked me, and it was also completely different because now I knew what the hands were capable of. I had just watched them. You're not hurt? He said. Statement, not question. No. He exhaled. It was very small. The only crack in the control. He kept his hands on my face for 1 extra second, just one, and then they were gone, and he turned and was already talking to Sal on the phone. And the man he was when he turned around was the managed version, the operational version, and the fraction of a crack had been sealed. I held on to the provenance file with both hands. Later in the building. His office. Just us. He was at the window again, and I was sitting on the edge of the desk and the file was between us. And neither of us had said anything for 90 seconds. Which I knew because I had started counting again. You stalked yourself, I said. He turned. Outside, before you turned around, you stopped yourself. I didn't know exactly what I meant. I saw the thing that came before the controlled version, and you chose which one arrived. How long have you been doing that? He looked at me for a long time. Since Matteo, he said, the name I had heard from Nico, the brother, the watch on his wrist, I got up. Not toward the door, toward him. I stopped within arm's reach. He was watching me with the inventory gaze, but with something else underneath it now. Something he was not managing exactly, but was being careful with. The way you're careful with something that might be real. SPOV, brief, sealed. She had seen the whole of it. His hands, his capability, the thing he became when someone reached for her. And she had not stepped back. Every person who had ever seen that version of him found a reason to create distance. She had walked toward him. He had not anticipated that. He did not have a strategy for that. He was going to need a strategy for that. Piccola, he said. Still quiet, but different. The word had less edge in it than the first time he'd used it. Don't manage me, I said. Don't look at me like I need to be handled. I'm not. You are. A long pause. I know, he said. Old habit. I put my hand on his arm, his wrist, the watch again, that same unconscious reach. And he looked down at my fingers on the worn leather strap, and something in his face opened and closed faster than I could name it. The file, I said. My voice was not entirely steady. I can have a full analysis for you by tomorrow? Elena. I can. Elena. He put his hand over mine. On the watch. Over my fingers. Stop for a minute. I stopped. The room was very quiet. The Chicago night outside the tall windows, the particular orange of city sky, and his hand over my hand over his brother's watch, and neither of us spoke. Then he stepped back. Both hands dropped. The professional distance returned. Tomorrow, he said. The analysis. Tomorrow, I agreed. He walked to the door, opened it, paused, with his back to me, hand on the frame, and said, quietly, to the door frame, "You did well today." He left. I sat in his office in the dark and felt something arriving in my chest that I was not ready to name, and tried very hard not to think about the way it had felt when he said stop for a minute and I had actually stopped. War had arrived, and I had stopped running from both directions. Sal was in the hospital on a Friday. Not from violence, or not directly. He had gone to the south side to meet a contact. A meeting that had been on the books for 2 weeks, and the contact had passed him information that turned out to be a setup. Not a shooting, something quieter and more deliberate. The contact had people waiting outside. 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, a concussion that had kept him in and out for 2 days. Sal, who moved carefully and spoke carefully and had looked at me on that first morning like I was someone worth being kind to, was in a hospital bed with machines counting his heartbeat in regular, mechanical beats. I went to see him on Saturday morning. He was awake. He looked smaller in the hospital bed, not diminished, but more visible, like the building he normally occupied had been stripped back to the man inside it. He had a book on the blanket over his lap and he was not reading it. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I wanted to." He looked at me with that particular look, the one that had been there from the first morning with the coffee, like he saw something specific. "You know who I keep thinking about?" he said. "My daughter. Lucia. She's in Portland, hasn't been back in 4 years. He paused. I was. Never the kind of father she deserved. Too much of this. He indicated the room, the hospital, everything it implied, and not enough of the other thing. He closed his eyes briefly. You remind me of her. Not in looks, in the way you walk into a room and try to read it before it reads you. I sat with that. Sal, I said, who gave the contact your meeting schedule. He opened his eyes, looked at me carefully. Someone inside, he said. We know that. A pause. Do you know who? No, but I've been watching the access logs on the provenance database. Someone else has been running queries on the same files I pulled, from inside the building. I held his eyes. Not Luca, not Katerina. Someone with access who shouldn't have it. He was quiet for a long moment. Tell him tonight, Sal said. Not tomorrow, tonight. I left the hospital and sat in Nico's car in the parking structure for 6 minutes, not moving. You okay? Nico said. He was eating an apple with the enthusiasm of a man who had recently made dietary promises he was genuinely trying to keep. Because you have the face of someone doing hard math. I'm thinking. About the situation or about? He stopped. About whether to leave, I said. Silence in the car. The apple lowered. You can, he said carefully. I want you to know that. Nobody's keeping you. He paused. But I've been driving for Luca for 6 years and I've never seen him. He doesn't. He stopped again, clearly navigating something. He checked on you 3 times the night of the ambush, after you went to your room. Just stood in the corridor for a minute. Nico looked at his apple. He didn't do that for Sal, and Sal's been with him for 20 years. I got out of the car. I walked across the hospital parking structure to the stairwell, and I stood in it alone for 4 minutes, and I thought about my apartment 40 minutes south, and my job, suspended, and my mother's voice on the phone, and my father who had fled this world before I was born, and the version of my future that was safe and intact, and did not involve Luca Moretti or his brother's watch or any of this. The version that drove south right now. The door was open. I could see the other side. I thought about Sal in his hospital bed, thinking about his daughter, about the cost of spending your whole life in this world and looking up one day to find that the person who was supposed to be there wasn't, because you had never been enough of the right thing. I thought about Luca at the window, the crack in the control, the way he'd said stop for a minute, and it had worked because it was the first time anyone had asked me to stop running toward a competent version of myself and just be in the room. I could go. I walked back to the car. Take me to the building, I said. Nico put the car in drive. He didn't say anything for 2 blocks. Then, for what it's worth, Nico. Right. Going. He drove. Then, quietly, almost to himself, I asked Daria about Dostoevsky today. I looked at him. She said. He paused, and his face did something soft and almost frightened. She said she'd been hoping I'd ask. He cleared his throat. We're getting coffee Tuesday. I looked at the city through the window. Good, I said. Yeah, he said. Yeah, it is. I had not driven south. I had chosen the direction with my eyes open, with full knowledge of what it cost, with Sal's machines counting beats in my memory and Nico's quiet joy in the car beside me, and the version of me that would have driven south was a person I had already been, and I wasn't her anymore. That choice had a price. I knew it did. I paid it in the parking structure, and I was still paying it, and I was choosing to pay it anyway. Luca was in the main room when I arrived. He looked up. The access logs, I said. We have a problem. He read my face. Tell me. I told him. They took me on a Sunday, not from the building. From the coffee shop 2 blocks east that I had been going to every morning because it was the one thing I had maintained from my previous life. My own version of ordinary. Nico had walked me. He had stayed outside because I had told him I needed 6 minutes of feeling like a normal person, and he had respected that, and he was the reason I felt guilty for approximately 48 hours after. They were efficient. 2 men, a car, a route that went north and then doubled back, and by the time I understood what was happening, we were somewhere in the warehouse district, and the door had the specific quality of doors that lock from the outside. I sat on a metal chair in a room with fluorescent lights and a concrete floor, and I ran the provenance methodology in my head. Not because it was useful, because it was mine. The thing I had built, the specific skill that was nobody else's, and if I was going to be in a room I hadn't chosen, I was going to occupy it with something that belonged to me. Renato Argento came in at the 2nd hour. I recognized him from Luca's files, 60. Silver-haired, the kind of face that had once been handsome in a specific way and now was handsome in the way that things that have become what they are look handsome, completely themselves. He sat down across from me and looked at me the way Luca looked at people, and I realized it was the same look, and the realization hit me with the specific chill of recognizing a shared formation. He had learned it from the same world. You're not frightened, he said. I'm frightened, I said. I'm just not going to perform it for you. Something almost respectful moved across his face. He trained you well. He didn't train me. No. He looked at me consideringly. No, I suppose not. He set a phone on the table between us. I want you to call him. Tell him where you are. Tell him to come alone and bring what I've asked for. You already sent him the location." A pause. Clever. "You needed him here. You needed to see if he'd come. You already told him where I was." I held his eyes. "This is about whether he comes the right way." Renato looked at me with something that was not entirely cold. "You understand this world better than you should." "Provenance research," I said. "You get good at reading what's missing." He stood up, moved to the door, then stopped and turned back and said something I had not expected. "Your grandfather did good work for this family once, 30 years ago." His voice was even, not cruel. "You shouldn't be in this room. That's not on you." And then, more quietly, "That's on Luca for not keeping you clear of it." He left. I sat in the room and thought about what that meant, the almost apology of it, the genuine, morally complicated quality of a man who could do this and also mean it when he said you shouldn't be here. And I thought, this is what Luca is afraid of becoming, this exact man. Capable of regret and continuing anyway. The traitor walked in 40 minutes later. "Katerina," I heard the key. I looked up, and she was in the doorway, with an expression that was doing something I had never seen it do. Not the flat appraisal. Not the sharp efficiency. Something that looked like old, specific grief. "Elena," she said. I could not speak for a moment. "I have been with this family for 30 years, she said. She came in. She sat across from me in the chair Renato had vacated, and she looked at me with that old grief, fully present. I watched Luca's father build it. I watched his brother die in it. I watched Luca hollow himself out trying to hold it together afterward. She folded her hands on the table. Renato was right for this family once. Before Luca's father chose the younger son, before everything that came from that choice. She held my eyes. "I am not your enemy. You're in a room that I'm locked in," I said. "I know." Something moved in her face. "I'm also about to give you the code for the exterior door." She set a folded paper on the table. "Because I have spent 30 years telling myself I was protecting the family, and I'm tired of lying about what protecting means." I looked at the paper. "The car 2 blocks north," she said. "Keys under the visor." I took the paper. "He's coming," she said. "He'll be here in 20 minutes, but you don't wait. You go now. You use the code and the car and you call him from the road." "Why are you?" "Because you walked toward him after the ambush," she said. "I've been watching this family for 30 years and I have never seen that. Not once." Her voice was steady. Completely steady. "I wanted to believe it couldn't last. I watched you at the hospital with Sal. I watched you make the choice to stay." She stood up. "Go, Elena." I went. Exterior door. 6 digits. A corridor that smelled of rust and winter air. A door onto an alley. 2 blocks north. The car exactly where she said. I called Luca. He answered on the first ring. His voice, "Elena." Just my name. Just that. "I'm out," I said. "I'm in a car 2 blocks north." "Katerina." My voice went briefly. It was Katerina. A silence that lasted exactly long enough for something to crack inside it. "I'm coming," he said. The line stayed open. Neither of us spoke. I drove north through the warehouse district, with the city lights beginning and the sound of his breathing in my ear, and the knowledge, arriving slowly, like light through a window, that the edge of too late was directly behind me. He found me 4 blocks from the warehouse. I had pulled over because my hands had started to shake, and I didn't think shaking hands should be driving, and I was sitting at the curb with the engine running and the heat on, because the cold had arrived after the adrenaline left. His car pulled up behind mine, and he was out of it before it fully stopped. He opened my door. He didn't speak. He looked at me. The inventory, always the inventory. And then he crouched down to eye level, and the look on his face was not the controlled version, and it was not the cracked version from the ambush. It was something I hadn't seen before, a third version underneath both of the others. He put his hand on the side of my face and held it there. I was crying. I hadn't known until that moment. The kind of crying that isn't dramatic. No sound, just the fact of it. Tears running down without announcement. "I'm okay," I said. "I know." He stood up. He took my hands, both of them, shaking slightly, and held them in his and looked at them for a moment and then said, "Come out of the car." I got out. He kept hold of my hands and then let them go, one, then the other, and I wrapped my arms around myself and looked at the street. "Katerina," I said, "I know." He had learned it from my call. His voice said what his face said, that he had already processed it, already made whatever the first adjustment was, and the devastation of it was locked somewhere behind the operational because he could not afford it yet. "She's gone. She left before my people arrived. She let me go." "Yes, she gave me the code. She told me where the car was." I looked up at him. "She did it because she thought—" I stopped. "She said she's been protecting the family for 30 years and she's tired of lying about what that means." Something moved through Luca's face. Complex and unresolved. Highest POV, brief, sealed. 30 years. She had been the thing he relied on more than any person in his life except Matteo. And she had been the crack in the foundation for God knows how long, and she had let Elena go. And he did not know what to do with both of those things being true at the same time. The betrayal and the mercy, both of them completely real. Both of them Katerina. He looked at the street. He came to some kind of decision. It settled in his jaw. "Renato is moving tonight," he said. "He expected to have you, and he doesn't." He looked at me. "He'll come direct now." "I know." I breathed. "I have the full provenance chain documented, the Antwerp connection, the distribution network, 3 gallery contacts, the shell company structure." I looked at him steadily. "I have all of it, from the files and from everything I've reconstructed in the last week." I paused. "I have enough to take his entire operation apart from the inside. Every forged work in the chain, every gallery contact, every financial instrument." Luca looked at me with those eyes, the inventory, the full inventory. And then something happened in them that I had never seen before. Not surprise. Something deeper than surprise. "You've been building this the whole time," he said. "Yes." "While you were compiling a case." I didn't know what else to do with what I knew. I held his eyes. I thought if I had it documented, if the whole chain was on record somewhere, then it didn't matter what Renato did to me. The case existed. A very long pause. "Piccola," he said. The word came out differently than it ever had. Not possessive, not managing, not even careful, like something he was allowing himself. "You built your own insurance policy. Out of provenance research." A sound came out of me that was not quite a laugh. It's what I'm good at. Nico appeared behind Luca, having arrived in the second car, and he was on his phone and looked simultaneously professional and like he was going to need several hours of private processing time. He caught my eye and gave me a short, emphatic nod that meant good, and then looked away. "Tonight," Luca said. Not to me. To Nico, to the 2 men behind him, to the operation that had already been assembling from the moment my call came through. "Sal's contact on the east side, the warehouse on Fulton. We go in at 2. He turned back to me. "You stay in the car, with Nico. The documentation. I have the documentation." He held my eyes. "You gave it to me. Let me use it." The way he said "you gave it to me," the specific weight of it, the awareness that he was naming something between us that was not just operational, made something tighten in my chest. "One of you might not come back," I said, blunt. Because I had been careful for long enough. Possibly. "I need to say something before, Elena." He stepped toward me. Close. His voice was very quiet. "I know." He said it like he had been carrying the same sentence and was setting it down. "I know." He pressed his forehead against mine. One moment. One slow breath. Then he stepped back, and his hand came up and touched the watch. Not me touching it, him touching it, his own thumb on the worn leather strap. And it was a gesture I had only seen once before, briefly, and it meant something I didn't have words for. "Stay in the car," he said. He walked toward the warehouse. I got in the car. Nico got in beside me and started the engine, and neither of us spoke for a long time. Then, very quietly, "Daria," he said, "Tuesday, I'm going to tell her how I feel." "Good," I said, "in case." He paused. "You know, I know." We waited. The operation took 3 hours. I know this because I sat in Nico's car on the north side of the Fulton warehouse and counted the minutes in the way you count minutes when there is nothing else to do with them, not to make them pass faster, but to give them shape, to keep them from becoming one long blurred thing you can't afterward separate into parts. I had given Luca everything. The full provenance chain, the shell company documentation, the Antwerp connection, the names of the 3 gallery contacts who had been processing the forged works through the legitimate market. 8 months of Renato Argento's operation, reconstructed from a storage room I had stumbled into and a skill I had built over 6 years, organized into a case that was clean and complete and legally devastating. Luca had gone in with it, not as sole leverage, as the thing that ended it without requiring the kind of violence that couldn't be undone. I heard 2 things from outside during the 3 hours. I heard the specific sound of a door on the building's east side that opened and closed. I heard once something that was not a shot but was close to it. Impact, abrupt, short. Then nothing. At 2:47 in the morning, Sal walked out of the building's main entrance. He walked carefully. His ribs were still healing, and you could see it in the way he held himself. The slight list to the left, but he walked, and he came to the car, and he knocked on Nico's window. "It's done," he said. Nico exhaled, the sound of a held breath releasing. "Luca," I said, inside, finishing. Sal looked at me through the window with those eyes that saw specific things. "He's okay." A pause. "He'll want a minute before he comes out." Sal paused. "Renato is not dead." I absorbed that. Not dead. Luca gave him a choice. Turn over the entire operation, documented, to the proper authorities the works that can be recovered, the full network, or the alternative. Sal looked at the building's main door. He chose the documents. Why? Because Luca told him something, Sal said. I don't know exactly what. They were in the back room. It was... He touched the brickwork of the car with his right hand, the 3 complete fingers. It was between them. What the hero becomes to defeat his villain, not more violent, but more honest. He had told Renato the truth about something, and the truth had been the weapon. 20 minutes later, Luca came out. He was not visibly hurt. No new damage, jacket still on, walk even. He came to the car and opened my door, and I got out and we stood on the street in the specific cold of a Chicago March at 3 in the morning, and the city was quiet in that post-operational way that is nothing like real quiet, but is the closest to it that this world offered. He put his arms around me, both of them, fully, no management in it. I held on. We stood there for a long time. I could feel his heartbeat. Fast, still operational, beginning to slow, and his breath against my hair and the hard edge of the watch against my shoulder. And I thought, this is what he feels like when he's done. Not empty. Fully present. The weight of everything he had carried for 8 years, held loosely. He was what I was becoming, he said. Very quiet. Against my hair. After Matteo. The first 2 years, I made choices. I told myself they were necessary. A breath. Renato watched me make them. He kept a list. Pause. The list was wrong. Not the facts of it, the interpretation. Another breath. He thought the choices made me like him. They didn't. They made me tired. Of the version of this I had been building. I didn't speak. I told him that, Luca said, in the back room. I told him I could see exactly who he was because I had been standing at that same door and I had turned around. He pulled back to look at me. He believed me. That's why he chose the documents. I looked at him. All of him. The man who had said yes to a stranger at a gala. The man with his brother's watch. The man who had stopped himself 3 times and then finally, in a room with Chicago outside its windows, had pressed his forehead to mine and said, "I know." "It's over," he said. "It's over," I agreed. Nico, from behind us, I hate to interrupt. He did not sound like he hated it at all. "But I'm going to go home and sleep for 12 hours and call Daria at a reasonable morning hour. Just noting that." He jingled his keys. "Sal, you need a ride?" Sal looked at the sky. "I need 3 weeks of sleep and my daughter to answer her phone." He looked at Luca. "Good work tonight." Then at me. "Both of you." They walked to the car. Luca and I stood on the Fulton Street pavement and the city did what it always did, indifferent and enormous around us. And the loss was there. It was real. Katerina. Gone. Somewhere. The 30 years of her in his life now carrying a new weight that wouldn't resolve. The cost of it was in his face and I didn't try to manage it for him. "She let you go," he said once. To himself. "She did," I said. It is over, I thought. Not clean. Not erased. Over. The months that followed were not what I expected. I think I expected a kind of arrival. The war ends and then you are somewhere, some recognizable version of after, with clean lines and settled answers. What actually happened was more gradual and less coherent and more real than any of that. The days took their shape back, slowly, in pieces. And the pieces didn't all fit the same way they had before. The Halverson Gallery reopened my position in April. Not under pressure, or not visibly under pressure, but the new director, a woman named Agnes Park, who had come in from a Boston institution, had reviewed the Modigliani flag I had filed 14 months ago and called it the most rigorous authentication challenge she had seen in a decade. The position offered was not the same position I had left. It was better. I took it. Luca's world did not become safe. I want to be clear about this because the truth of it matters. He was still what he was. Still the man in the room that others made space around. Still the quiet center of an organization whose business I understood better than I had in January and had not made peace with entirely. I had made peace with him, which was different. And the distinction required constant work, the kind of work that doesn't finish. Katerina had not been found. This was its own specific weight. Not her absence, but the absence of resolution, the fact of her in his life for 30 years, and now the fact of her somewhere outside of it, carrying the things she had done, and the things she had also done. Luca didn't speak of her often. When he did, it was in the specific, careful way of someone who had decided to hold a complicated feeling without requiring it to be simple. Sal's daughter called in May. He told me over coffee in the building's kitchen. He was coming in 3 days a week now, which was the doctor's compromise and Luca's non-negotiable. And he said it the way he said most things. Plainly, with the economy of someone who had learned not to waste words. "Lucia. She's coming for a week in June." He looked at his coffee. 41 years old and I still don't know how to talk to her. He paused. "I'm going to try anyway." "She called," I said. "She did the first part." He looked at me. "Yes," he said, "she did." Something in his face relaxed, just slightly, like a door unlocking. "You're right. Nico and Daria were, the only word for it was luminously in progress." He came in every morning with the specific energy of a man who had recently had evidence that life was worth it. And he did not stop talking about her. And Luca endured this with the patient tolerance of someone who has decided that human happiness is not, in the final accounting, something to discourage. I was in the kitchen with both of them in early July, a Tuesday, unremarkable, the building doing its usual day around us, when Luca came in and stood in the doorway with an expression I had come to recognize as the external surface of an internal decision. "Nico," he said, "give us a few minutes." Nico took his coffee and his radiant mood and withdrew without apparent resentment. Luca came and sat down at the table. Across from me, he put something on the table between us. A key. Old. Heavy. The kind of key that opens something that was built to last. "This is the front door," he said. "Of the house. The Evanston house." A pause. "Not the River North building. The..." He stopped. "The one I live in." I looked at the key. I'm not asking you to leave the gallery, he said, or the apartment, or any part of the life you've built that belongs to you. He held my eyes. I'm asking if you want a door that opens from both sides. Not a fairy tale proposal, no speech, no staging, no sentiment that hadn't been earned by everything we had survived, just a key on a table, and his eyes on mine in the full, undefended honesty of a man who had learned to say the thing directly because he had run out of time for anything else. It's not safe, I said. No. Your world doesn't become safe. No, it doesn't. I know that. I know that. I know you know. I picked up the key. It was heavier than it looked, cold from his pocket warming in my hand. Piccola, he said, and the word was completely warm. No edge in it, no management, no observation. Just the word, carrying everything, the gala, the storage room, the ambush, the watch, the forehead to forehead in the cold, and all the ordinary days between the extraordinary ones. Say yes. I looked at him. Same face, same dark eyes doing their inventory. The silver at his temples that I had looked at the gala when I hadn't known his name, thinking he looked solid, thinking he looked like someone who might be decent. He was decent, in all the ways that were difficult and imperfect and specific to what he was. Yes, I said. He didn't move for a moment. Just let it land. Then Nico from the corridor, barely muffled. I knew I'd. Nico. Luca's voice. One tone. Going. The door to the kitchen swung gently on its hinges. Luca looked at me across the table and the corner of his mouth moved, and this time, it arrived all the way. 8 months later, on a Wednesday in November, I was in the middle of a provenance report for a disputed Chile. When the building's front door opened and I heard Luca's voice in the hallway, low and unhurried, speaking to someone I didn't recognize. I had moved into the Evanston house in August. This is a fact I am still not entirely used to reporting. The word home arrives oddly around it, not wrong, just new. The way a piece of furniture sounds different in a room when you've rearranged everything else around it. The house had a study on the second floor that looked out over a garden that had been maintained by someone before me and was now maintained jointly. Luca, who had opinions about the hawthorn that were specific and almost aggressive, and me, who had started keeping provenance files on the plants the way I kept them on paintings, because the habit was apparently now constitutive of my personality. I came downstairs at 6 because I could smell dinner, not mine, someone else's, the specific olive and garlic smell of Sal cooking, which had become a Wednesday fixture after his daughter's visit had extended from 1 week to indefinitely, and Sal had acquired a quality of aliveness that I was fairly sure he hadn't had before. The kitchen held Sal at the stove, Nico at the counter with a bowl of actual vegetables that he was eating without complaint, because Daria had apparently transformed his relationship with nutrition, and Luca, standing in the doorway with his jacket off and his sleeves turned back and the old watch on his wrist catching the kitchen light. He looked up when I came in. Something in his face. That specific, instantaneous recalibration, the inventory arriving and completing before I had reached the bottom stair. Nico said, Agnes Park called the office this morning. She wants Elena for the Vienna consulting project. He said it with the air of a man delivering important news and watching for reactions. The 6-week one. I know, I said. She emailed me. And? I told her I'd let her know by Friday. Luca said nothing. He moved to the table and sat down and opened his phone, doing the thing he did in the evenings, managing the incoming at the end of the day. And I sat down across from him, and the table was between us the same way it had been in January, when he had told me things in a specific order to keep me in my chair. I watched him. He had not asked about Vienna. He would not ask. He would wait until I decided, and whatever I decided would be what happened, and his patience with that. The specific, unjealous, unmanaging patience of a man who had decided that my autonomy was not a problem to solve, but a fact of who I was the thing I had not expected and had come to rely on in a way I was still mapping. Vienna, I said. He looked up. I'm going to tell her yes, I said. For the 6 weeks. I'd want you to come for one of them if there's a show at the Belvedere in March that has 3 pieces with contested provenance I've been tracking for 2 years. He looked at me. the flat, thorough eyes. "The Shield show?" he said. "You know it? I know the disputed Hartman work in the third room." The corner of his mouth. "You've been talking about that piece for 2 months." I hadn't known he had been listening to the level of the specific room. He reached across the table. His hand came over mine, the same way it had in his office after the ambush over the watch. But now it was his hand on my hand on the table. The watch at his wrist, the worn leather strap and the steel case that had been his brother's for a year and his for 8. I turned my hand over and held it. "When did you stop?" I started. When did you stop counting minutes at the warehouse? You counted your way through everything in the beginning." I looked at him. "When did that stop?" he considered. "When I stopped needing the distance from what was happening." He looked at our hands on the table, when the present tense stopped being a threat. Sal set a bowl of something warm in front of me that smelled of winter and effort and said, without looking up from the stove, "Lucia's bringing her partner in December. I don't know what to do with that." "Be happy," I said. He turned. Looked at me. Just like that? Just like that. He turned back to the stove and made a sound that was the beginning of something larger, and then thought better of it and became focused on the sauce. "Nico, Daria's reading Turgenev now." I looked up Turgenev. There's a lot of Turgenev. "A beat. I'm going to need more time." "Luca," without looking up from his phone, "you have it." The kitchen held all of us. Sal and his careful joy, Nico and his lit-up ordinary, Luca and his quiet present tense, and me with my hand in his, and my provenance report upstairs and Vienna in March, and the Chile piece I had been tracking for 2 years. And the life we had built around each other was strange, and specific and imperfect and entirely real. He looked up from his phone, at me. With those eyes, I looked back. No strategy, no performance. The same undefended directness I had brought to a gala in January, not knowing what I was doing, and he had looked at it and said yes before he had decided to, and here we were. He raised my hand, still in his, and touched his lips to the back of it, briefly, then set it back on the table and returned to his phone. The watch on his wrist. The same watch. The same worn leather strap and the steel case with its small scratches. His brother's. Now also, somehow, ours. The kitchen was warm. Outside, November was doing what November does. Inside, the dinner was almost ready, and Sal was humming something tuneless and content, and Nico was explaining Turgenev to himself in a murmur, and Luca's thumb was drawing a slow, absent arc on the back of my hand. I had asked a stranger to pretend to be my husband. He had said yes before he decided to. Neither of us had left the role. What lingers after the last page? Katerina is somewhere in the world, not found, not resolved. She betrayed Luca for 30 years of accumulated grief, and she let Elena go out of something that looked like love for what the family should have been. She is not clean, and she is not simply guilty, and Luca has not said what he would do if she came back. That question has no easy answer, neither does this one.